Thanks everybody for joining us for another episode of our Coro Chronicles. And today I have, and it seems like I always have a special guest, but Elise is like close to my heart. And she, by the end of this, if not before that, she will be very close to your heart. And instead of me introducing her, I would love for you, Elise, to kind of tell everyone a little bit about you, your background, and then how in the world did you get connected to this crazy crew at Coro?
My name is Elisa Bosley. I'm a licensed chaplain and have a special ministry to elders with dementia. So I have a long background. Actually, I have several long backgrounds. I was a professional magazine editor for many years, and I still do freelance writing and editing. So a lot of work with content, and also have a long history of leading worship and Bible studies in different Christian-based ministries, churches, parachurch, college ministry, all kinds of that. So I have a long history of that. At a certain point in my life, now it's about 10 years ago, I was wrapping up the professional editing part of my career and trying to figure out what was next for me. And at that time, I had also been volunteering at a memory care community close to my home here in Boulder, and found that I just loved being with those people. And I was really lucky that that particular place had and still has a really high value for spiritual care. So I was
Oh,
actually just an observer at first and was watching the person who was operating as their chaplain at the time do these church services for the residents. And it was just like this epiphany, because I saw that the power of this spiritual offering was just enormous for these residents. And of course, with my background as a worship leader and a Bible study
yes.
leader, I just saw it all coming together. I thought, oh, this is the best thing I've ever seen. And so I decided I didn't decide. They asked me when that
Of course
gentleman
they
moved
did.
on to another role. Well, they knew my background. And again, I'd been volunteering there
Mm-hmm.
for a couple of years at that point, not doing spiritual care, just volunteering to be with the residents. Um, they asked me at that time, when this gentleman moved on, if I would take over the spiritual care role. And of course, I just jumped at it. I thought
Oh,
this is perfect, because I was leaving my other role and this just fit exactly in.
the
So
timing.
then I know exactly timing, God's timing for
Yeah.
sure. I realized as I got into it that there were very few resources out there, spiritual resources for specifically aimed at people with dementia, developed for people with dementia. Because I was looking for them and I was finding
Mm.
nothing. Well, here's where my background as a writer and editor come in, because I thought, well, I can create these resources, and
Mhm.
I know how to create a website and put them up online, and then other people could do this work. They can just take my Bible studies, they can take my church service agendas and use them, because I was seeing, what an impact it made in the people that I was ministering to. And I thought, well, this could be for anybody. But I could imagine, like me, people were looking for it and not finding anything, because there just wasn't anything out there. Very, very little. Again,
So what year
specifically aimed
was
at
this
people
that
with
you
dementia.
started?
Oh gosh, people always ask me that, and it's fuzzy, because again, it was sort of
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
evolution. I would have said 2016 to 2018 was where it was really
Uh,
starting to gel. I think I got my chaplain credential in 2018, but I was already doing the work
right.
before that. So yeah, and it just took off, and then COVID completely
Yeah.
changed everything. That's the understatement of the century.
Of the
Well,
yes.
what changed for me was, obviously I could no longer go into resident. At that point, I was going
Mhm.
into 4 different residences, and obviously I couldn't do that anymore. So I shifted to video, which had never been part of
Mm.
my plan. I wasn't planning to make videos. So but I remember Easter was coming up, right? We all remember it was right around March
That's right. It was
2020. Yeah.
March. And the
And
world
I thought,
closed.
I am not gonna let Easter go by without these
Oh,
residents having something. And so I just literally just sat down in front of my computer camera and started recording the church services as a video. And thank God, oh, I haven't even gotten into the music part yet. But by that time, I had all of my music already online and all the hymns. And so I was able to create these video church services. Well, Deb, now they're all over the world. I'm still stunned
oh,
by this. But
wow.
yeah, everybody was looking for the same thing,
Mhm.
dementia friendly or, any senior residents,
Yeah.
a video chaplain service that they could show to their residents, especially during a time where people were so scared and cut off. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that's a long story, but that's how I got to where I am
No,
today.
I think that's what's so important is like we talk about, especially in for any of us, is that we all have a story. and
Right.
and it's like yes, we know who you are, we know what you bring to Faith First, and what you bring to the world, but there's also power in how that came about. And that's why I
Hmm.
think it's always that's the one thing with like having the Coro Chronicles is being able to these relationships like give, like I know the story, but I want people that know us to know this story and to know your story. So now we're kind of stepping into the world of, I mean, it did. COVID shifted the entire world. But man, the driving force that you had going, it is Easter. And it's so funny because it's like, I mean, we all remember right there. Like, in fact, I think it was like March 20th or something like that. But yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
like everything changed. And it even for us
Just.
took a minute to like step back and go, like,
Hmm.
how are we going to do this? Like, how is life going to be for our elders in communities? Well, and then that, well, here we go from our, from I guess Coro's view of you, we same thing. It's like we knew that we needed to add more content really quickly, that because of the situation, even though our Faith First content had a lot of great and wonderful things, but we knew we needed to find, honestly, we were trying to look for something or someone that was specific in elder care, but could bring fresh new content and be a person, be a face versus just supplying like videos of something or audio. And
Hmm.
so we did. I mean, our vice president, I mean, that's what Hillary did. Hillary was on a quest, and
Yeah.
going back to
Somehow she found me.
this guiding light brought her to you. Yeah. So
Yeah.
what was that like when all of a sudden it's just like, who is these people, this company called Coro? And
It was really great because again, it's just me. I'm not a company. I don't have, some PR firm behind me. So my prayer always was, how can I get this material out there? I want people to find it, whether they use it themselves or it's a activity director out there that's just dying for something to show their residents that's spiritual, but they don't have that background. So how are they going to find it? So when I heard originally from Hillary, it was such a great, it made me so happy because first of all, it made me happy to know that there was an organization out there dedicated to elders and dedicated to faith content, right? That it was like, oh, that is great. But you all had such a bigger reach than I do personally, because you had these contacts with senior homes all over the place, And so I thought that's a marriage made in heaven, as it were, because
ah,
I
I
can
love that.
I can share I can share my content with you to share with the senior residences that
Mhm.
you're already in contact with, which again was always my hope and prayer. So to me, that was just a natural fit.
Oh, when we think about it, it was just like in the beginning and being able, I mean, even for me, because I'm also over training, and like to be able to like, I still to this day, it's like when I do training and when I go into to Faith First, it's like you're always a direct piece that I go to because
Mm,
it's such a meaningful offering, because it's like you're bringing in music, you're bringing in scripture, you're bringing in just thoughts of inspiration to kind of think about like our daily living,
mm,
or like gratitude.
mm.
So for me,
Well,
you're
thank you.
not only within all the communities, but it's just like you're literally part of all of my trainings.
Oh, thank you.
But what is it specifically? I mean, even though yes, your content, because we go into IL, AL, but for you, you were really this gravitational pull to memory care. So where did that come from
Yeah.
specifically?
Oh, great question. So, yeah, as I was telling my story earlier, I forgot
Mhm.
to mention that my father-in-law had Alzheimer's disease. So my husband and I,
Oh.
and they lived here in this, they lived here in Boulder. My mother-in-law, she's still alive, and my mother-in-law was his primary caregiver for, I would say probably
Mhm.
10 years, and 6 or 5 years very intently. And so, since we also live in Boulder, we were very intimately involved with his care. And I absolutely loved hanging out with him. I've always loved hanging out with elders. I've been very fortunate to hang out with elders most of my life. I had all four of my grandparents until I was well into college. And I loved hanging out with him. And it's, it was a little bit it was just a little surprising, I think, because I was surprised that it was difficult for people to hang out with him, or really anybody with Alzheimer's, because it was just
Mhm.
something I loved to do very naturally. But I was getting a lot of feedback. Oh, you're so good at this, and you're so natural with him. And so, again, I always tell people when they say, oh, you're so amazing to do this and it's so noble, and I say, well, thank you, I appreciate that, but everybody has their thing, right? Like,
Mhm.
I don't
Completely.
especially I would never want to teach middle school, right? Or I
Ah,
wouldn't
I'm with you.
want to teach. Yeah. So everybody has their thing that I think God has planted in them, whether that's, middle school or kindergarten, or whatever it is. And for me,
Elder
it's
care.
it's people with
Mhm.
dementia and elder care in general, but especially people with dementia, because I feel like what I've seen so often is that they're treated as if they're not there, or they're assumed that they're, gone, quote unquote, they're gone.
Yes.
And I just think that's the farthest thing from the truth. They're very much there. It takes some skills
Mhm.
to
It does.
learn how to interact with them on their level and in their reality. It does take some
Mhm.
skills, but man, the responses and the engagement that is possible is profound. And I believe that's a spiritual reality, right? That God has not given up on them, that God is very much alive, and the spirit is very much, and the scripture backs
Mhm.
that up. The scripture says we have this treasure in jars of clay. Right? It's like, yeah, we're all jars of clay, right? We're just very frail, and our bodies are wasting away. Paul writes about that in Second Corinthians. Our bodies are wasting away, but our spirits are renewed day by day. That's what the scripture says.
Oh
Though our
my God,
outer
you're
selves
gonna
are
make
wasting
me
away, our
cry in the
inner yeah,
podcast.
our inner selves are being
Wow.
renewed day by day. I had a friend who said, "Yeah, our souls are as young as the day we were born." And that's what I see, right? The souls of these elders with dementia. I saw that in my father-in-law. I see that every time that I'm with elders with dementia. So that is the part of me that intersects with, the spirit doing that's like, this is what I want to make clear to the to the world, that
Yeah.
these people have absolute complete dignity and worth and value as human beings. They are not done. They are not gone, and we can learn from them. I often say that these elders are my
Oh, I
teachers.
love that you say that, because I
Yeah,
completely echo that. Because, like, I mean, obviously, we've all been in communities and we've seen like when families come to visit,
yeah,
and we've had those kind of uncomfortable conversations where like an adult child is trying to convince us even on what kind of programming or content to provide. Like there's a story I remember, and it was actually a wife, and it was his second marriage, and she kept telling us how much he loved country music.
Mm,
And so we were doing everything to provide him country music in all capacities, because we weren't seeing that kind of awakening. We weren't seeing
mm,
that connection. And so finally we sat with her and talked about how they met. And I mean, her husband was in memory care, and we actually were able to use music as a little bit of a, golly, the best way to say is a time machine, because she had
yeah.
met him. He was in his 40s, and they met country line dancing. That was the start of the relationship. So
Ooh, great.
we all understood why country music was so important to her, because it was so important to that phase of their relationship. But for where he was in memory care, we knew there wasn't a connection. And so
Hmm.
then she started telling us more about his history, and come to find out he was a band leader.
Oh, wow.
He through high school, and he loved jazz. And so we started playing those programs for him. And it
Yeah.
was just, you just saw him like just stand up and
Hmm.
start to orchestrate, start to do his thing. And
Isn't
and
that great?
yeah, but it was that moment really for me, because it was early on. I'd only been with Coro for a couple of years. And
Mm,
it was, for me, it was just like that moment yet again validating, like we try to bring them into our today. We try to,
hmm.
because it makes
Hmm.
us comfortable.
Right.
So we're
Right.
trying to get them
Exactly.
to be in our moment because it makes
Right.
us comfortable. But
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
minute you take your part out and
Needs
just
and ego and all that. Yeah.
yes,
Expectations.
yes.
Yes.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. And then and it goes back to, he was able to teach us so much. Like
Hmm.
for me, I'm sharing this story in 2024, and this happened really early on. But it was just yet again, I completely agree that we
Yeah.
keep thinking, or a lot of people, they only engage memory care that one story because they
Hmm.
have an in-law, or they have a parent or a relative. But for us, we've seen this magic, and we've seen how
Yeah.
they can teach us so much, because we're in it day to day.
Hmm.
And it
Yeah.
is it's and it is it's one of those things of, like, you can teach people tasks, but you can't teach people how to be a caregiver.
Yeah.
That's just like, we keep holding our hearts, because it's just part of our DNA.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
love
Exactly.
that.
Well, and the music part of it, it so bears repeating, and it's one of the reasons why I immediately connected with Coros, because you all understood from the get go. I didn't have to convince you how important that music piece is. So
Mm-hmm.
whether it's country music or jazz, and at least for this generation that we're talking about, so many of them went to church every Sunday. And
Oh,
those
oh,
hymns, those old hymns that
oh yeah.
churches sadly hardly sing anymore, are
Mm,
incredibly powerful. And I'm sure you know this, Deb, but there's research that shows that the center of the brain that is responsible for storing music is almost completely untouched by Alzheimer's disease
yep,
to the
exactly.
very end.
Yep.
And so those songs, those hymns, I cannot count how many times I've seen people that are essentially nonverbal
Mhm.
start to sing those songs. And the best part of it for me is those songs combine the beauty and the memory of music with truth, because the lyrics are full of the truth, the hope, the love, the peace of God, right? Unlike, I love country music, I love jazz, but they don't have that element as
No,
much, let's say.
no.
They connect spiritually just through the tunes, but the lyrics are amazing grace. I mean, it's incredible
Oh,
how powerful it is, and that those elders gain that beautiful truth even as they're singing.
you're exactly right. I mean, I have been called to, like, go into a community because there was a resident who was literally given up by her family. And I didn't even know that you could become an orphan as an elder. And when I
Oh, yeah.
heard that, I just got in my car and went to this community because
Yeah.
I couldn't grasp that.
Right.
And I remember sitting beside her in her wheelchair, and the nursing staff was around me just because they knew she was in the final stages and they
Mm,
just wanted to give her something. They just didn't know what to give her.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
I sat there, and yes, you're right. With the amount of information they were able to give me, I kind of went back through like popular music of
Mhm.
specific decades, just trying to see if I could get even an eye wink or get something. And
Mhm.
I was almost about to give up. And then my one of our music designers said, you know what, go to hymns because maybe that's how far along she is.
Mhm.
So I went, and I will never forget this moment. All of a sudden, I'm sitting there, and it wasn't the first, but it was the second hymn. She
Mm.
lifts her head up.
Oh.
She says, wow, amen, and literally starts to rock side to side.
Ah, I love that.
Like, I was in tears, the whole staff, we were all in tears, and also
Yeah.
kind of like still like deer in headlights of
Yeah.
what we just witnessed.
Yeah.
And she was. I mean,
Yeah.
that's where she was. She was at the front pew with her church. She was in a
That's so
place that
great.
was familiar and warm. And so
Yeah.
they played hymns for her until the day she passed
Yeah.
away.
Yeah. Oh,
And
I've seen that many times, and
oh,
it just never ceases to bring me to tears, and just to praise God, right? Because it's like
yes.
you haven't forgotten your children. They're,
Mhm.
they're, and this is the way that they connect as they're passing over, right? As they're going home. Oh, I love it. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, and there's so many other stories. I know we could probably do a podcast just
we
on
totally could.
storytelling,
Oh,
just on
easily,
storytelling,
easily.
which that actually might be something we need to do.
It's
Because
pretty
I
great. I
think,
do write them down. Yes.
yeah, because they're so powerful. And I hope you write them down and you're planning to write a book.
Oh, people say that all the time. Yeah,
Okay.
maybe,
Well,
maybe. I mean, it would just be
we're videotaping
stories.
this, so this is a document of
Hold me to.
discussing that,
Okay.
because my husband's a nurse practitioner and he did hospice and he did cancer care for many years. And he would do the same thing. And he ended up losing his notebook of these
Oh gosh.
stories. And he always said, that's what I wanted to do, is to create a book for
Yeah.
the caregivers of tomorrow, to
Yeah. Well,
know
the
that this
stories give
is,
people hope, I think.
yes,
They sort of show
1,000.
what's possible, and because you read these things and you just think, really? I mean, again, as you say, sadly, when families, uh, and I guess I want to say first, I never want to minimize how hard the journey is when you have a
Yeah,
loved one with Alzheimer's or dementia of any kind. It is so hard, and it's full of grief, anticipatory grief, actual grief. So I don't ever want to minimize that. What I'm trying to bring to the table is that's not the only story about Alzheimer's. It is hard. It is difficult. It is a terrible disease. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. However, that's not the only part of the story. There can be great blessing and teaching and joy and miracles. That's what we're talking about with
miracles.
these
Yeah.
stories. And if you have some tools, you can see that, you can access it, and hopefully make that final journey better than it otherwise could be.
And
Yeah.
I love that because that's exactly what it is. That's what we're providing is our
Right.
tools, of
Right.
tools to access.
Right.
Especially, and you're right, this journey.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still all these years, it's still an unbelievably, it's a journey like no other.
Yeah. That's
Like
exactly
no
right.
And I love, like, especially with the focus of memory care. And I know some people will even ask us, like, well, when do you bring music in? When do you bring spiritual? Or once they're in these
Mm.
final stages, does it really matter?
Mm.
So I would like for you to answer that question.
Oh, well, how soon do you bring in spiritual care? The sooner the better,
Mhm.
really, for anybody, any age,
Yeah.
any stage. I think, again, it's a little bit what we've been talking about already, Deb, with these stories. I have not ever seen a stage, so to speak, that
Yeah.
doesn't respond to the music or some kind of spiritual. It might just be praying. I mean, again, I can't count the number of residents I've been with that are nonverbal, look like they're completely checked out, look like they're asleep. And even if I just have a hand on their shoulder and pray for them, some kind of response will happen. You know, the nod or
Yeah.
look at me for a second or whatever it is. We again, our culture especially, I think, is so focused on cognition as the measure of humanity, really.
Mhm.
And it's like, that we need a bigger vision than that.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
any little I just feel like if somebody's still here, if there's somebody
Mhm.
who's still breathing and living, the stage doesn't matter. They're here for a reason. That reason may be to teach something to us, right?
Yes,
or
yes.
or God is interacting with them, deep calls to deep. The spirit is doing something in them that we can't even see. I
Mhm.
often feel like dementia is this liminal space. It's an in between space, right? They're not fully here, they're not fully in the next world, but it's a because of that, I feel like that's a very rich spiritual place to be, because they're not worried about anything in the current world, right?
Yeah,
It's fading to
it's
them, but
amazing.
the next world is not yet clear, and it's an in between. It's an in between. So I don't know. I find it to be a very rich place, no matter what the stage is. And again, I've seen and continue to see. I have elders that you would almost not know they had dementia, right? Very verbal, very
Mhm.
physically able, all the way from that end to they're lying in bed with their eyes closed, and all I'm getting is a squeeze of the hand. That was one of the first. I just
Oh,
remember that was so great. This
oh,
woman who I knew she was a believer, and she was dying, and she was in bed, and I went to see her, and I just held her hand, and I said, um, something like, "Do you need some water or something like that?" Squeeze my hand, nothing. And I said, "Would you like me to sing some hymns?" Squeeze my hand, and she squeezed right immediately. And
oh,
so for the next hour, I just sang hymns over her, and eventually her family came in and they were singing with me. It turned out they were in ministry themselves, and their
oh,
sons were there. And so again, they could have just left her lying in bed quietly
mhm.
alone, but she signaled that that would be a comfort to her.
A
And
comfort.
yeah, so we did it. And it was a comfort to us, to the family
Oh, yeah.
as they joined into that time of in betweenness.
Mhm.
And they're singing the hymns again of truth. And she's anyway, it was a beautiful moment.
No, in fact, years ago, I got an email from a daughter,
Mm,
and she had kind of tracked me down just because our music first was at the community, and
mhm,
her mother was, they had, her and her three brothers had all gotten a phone call, you need to come in because your mother's
mm,
passing. And so apparently there had been like a family conflict,
mm,
and so the siblings weren't really that close anymore.
mm.
And she was kind of describing this in an email, and I'm going to try to share the story without crying. But same thing, her
It's
mother was
okay.
passing. Her and her brothers came into the room. A nurse came in and said, I'm going to let you have some time with your mom. But the nurse knew that there was some energy in this space, and she
Tension.
knew that she
Mm,
needed to
mm,
provide, yeah, exactly, friction. That's a great word. And so
mhm,
she put on music first, and she put on hymns,
mm,
the power of hymns. Oh my goodness. And so
mm,
a hymn came on, and the daughter was telling me in this email, we were all quiet, and she's like, a hymn came on that we all recognized. And she said, we
mm,
looked down at
mhm,
our mom, and our mom opened her eyes, and we all knew she knew this song too. And she
mm,
made she made eye
I know.
contact with each of her children.
Oh,
And
wow. Chills.
she made eye contact with each of her children. And
Hmm.
she just said she had this peace about her.
Wow.
And she closed her eyes and passed away
And that was it. See,
while
it
her
makes me cry.
yeah,
It's like
while her
so beautiful.
children are singing to her.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And they
That's so
just
great.
had this moment. And she's like, the
I
reason why
know.
I needed to find you is because I needed to tell you that we can't imagine
Yeah.
a better gift you could have given us. And
Hmm.
I obviously had no idea. But she said that just providing hymns in that moment for all of them,
Hmm. Right.
and for ironically a hymn to come on that they could all sing and hum to as their mother was passing this earth.
Right. I mean, what a gift. It's just,
Oh,
and I've seen that countless times. And don't you want, I mean, then you're like, you get greedy for it. Like I want this for everybody. I want
yes.
that connection and that
Hmm.
peace, right? But again,
Yes.
we're often, and I understand this, but we're so scared of death. We don't want to talk about it. We don't
Hmm.
want to face
Yes.
it. And yet
Yep.
it is, of course, inevitable. It's, I remember one of my elders saying, ain't none of us going to avoid it. And
Yep.
what can we do? That was such a great, that what can we do in that space to, you know, see it and treat it and embrace it even as what it is, that there's an ending, but there's something beautiful in it. Yeah.
No, 1,000%. And yes, because it's something that that we all struggle with.
Mm,
But
yeah.
having that gift of your faith, your connection, and then the thought of that as she's leaving this world, the last faces that she sees are the face of her
Yeah.
children. Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
that's
Oh,
beautiful. Yeah, that's
yeah.
great.
So, I mean, we've kind of talked a bit about like a spiritual journey and that for all of us, it's like
Hmm.
a stage. Like
Hmm.
it's to bring in spiritual supports at any stage, at any moment in
Hmm.
time for
Hmm.
all of us.
Hmm.
But I'm curious, especially because of your background. But how is there a difference between religious care and spiritual care?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way I've heard it explained to me that makes the most sense is that religious care is a specific expression of a faith. So, Catholic or
Okay.
Jewish or Muslim or whatever it is, that a specific expression of whatever that faith journey is, right? And
Mm,
so it helps to have some knowledge and hopefully connection with a specific religious expression if you're going to minister to that person, right?
mhm,
So I, as a chaplain, I'm really, chaplains by definition are non-denominational. So I'm Christian myself. I can
mhm,
minister very specifically to a Christian religious
mhm,
person. But if somebody is Jewish and they
mhm,
want spiritual care, it's still my job to meet them or to find somebody who can, right?
mhm,
So spiritual care, I consider more general, really universal, like
mhm,
that all people have spiritual needs and realities. So, joy is a spiritual reality, and fear is a spiritual reality, and hope, and those things that are common to humanity. And those uh, everybody has, and those needs can and should be met. And as
mhm.
part of, we talk a lot in elder care about person-centered care, right? Make
Right.
sure you're meeting the whole person. And that usually means their physical needs and their emotional needs and their social needs, right? But it often drops off at the spiritual
Mm,
need. it's not necessarily somebody's fault, but people feel like, oh, that's too personal, or I don't have the
Yeah.
skills to meet that need, or whatever it is. And yet, it is so, in my opinion, so important if we're talking about person centered care.
Mhm.
We need to be meeting what is the person's needs on that level that are, again, universal in the human experience,
Mhm.
something above ourselves, something outside of ourselves, but yet within ourselves as well, if
Right.
that makes sense.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, that was one of the things when we brought Faith First,
Mhm.
as part of underneath our Coro umbrella of offerings.
Yeah.
That was one of the things, is that we first automatically started off with Christianity because that was the most prominent. But
Right.
then we were having people, which obviously it's like, yes, we need to be more diverse and kind of
Hmm.
have more of an um, open library of other communities of
Exactly.
faith, because because even for me, it was like learning what, um, like in Islam versus Native
Hmm.
American general spirituality, but understanding there are
Right.
traditions specific to those.
Exactly.
Then you're right, the spiritual, like
Hmm.
the joy, the inspiration, the hope,
Right.
like the hope across all of them, the love across all of them.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
love how you open up, and which is a great segue into the skill,
Mm.
and and caregivers especially, they aren't comfortable even sometimes within
Hmm.
their own community of faith, because there's different, like in Christianity there's so many different denominations,
Right. Right.
everything. So let's just say, just for people, someone that's watching that might be curious,
Hmm.
like you can access Faith First, we can access your
Right.
worship services and hymns and so forth. But if someone is not from that community of faith, do they need to be certified to walk into someone's room and like, okay, I want to provide some type of spiritual care, but I'm not certified, because people always have to be certified in different things before
Mm.
they can offer
Yeah. Well, you'll get different opinions on this.
it. Okay, okay.
My opinion is that no, you don't need a certification. I don't see anything in the Bible or really anything anywhere that says, oh, you have to have a specific certification. I now, if I hasten to add, if you're going to be a chaplain in certain contexts, like
Mhm.
a hospital or the armed services, they have requirements for a certain level
Mhm.
of education, etc. Um, I I got a certification because I wanted the accountability for myself. Right? It's like,
Mhm.
okay, I don't want to just be me off doing my own thing. I want to have a larger group, but
Mhm.
it's not required. I mean, it takes um, so much more important is if you have love, if you have love and a desire to care, you can. That's why I created the resources that I did. It's like, you can do this.
Mhm.
Anybody can do this. You do not need to be a professional. So, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of times there's clergy that are really great at providing spiritual care, but they don't have any experience with dementia, right? And then
Mhm.
there's caregivers that have experience with dementia or elder care in general, but they don't have the what they think of as the training for the spiritual care. And you do want to have both. But again, that's the materials I feel like I try to create. I answer any question that and it ever comes to me, that
Mhm.
you don't have to be official to provide this care. You do need, like we keep saying, some skills, but they're
Mhm.
they're learnable, they're doable, I think, by anybody who has a heart for it. I've often said, it's like, okay, it'd be great if every elder care place could hire a non-denominational chaplain. It would be ideal. It would be a
Mhm.
huge return on
Oh,
investment for the residents, for the staff, for the families. I highly
mhm.
encourage it across the board. However, if they can't or won't, find somebody on your staff that has a heart for this, and they can be trained. They can receive the tools that they need, whether that's through
Mhm.
Faith First or whatever, to provide this care. And that's really largely what's happening, right? Some activity director or
Right.
caregiver will
Yep.
have a heart for it and say, we need something. and then they go looking and they find it. And that's really all it takes. It's like you have a heart for it, you have a value for the spiritual care, you can
Mm.
do it, and here are the tools to do it. I hope
Yeah.
that
I mean,
answers your
exactly.
question.
No, completely, completely. Well, it's just like what you were saying before is that, like, even for yourself, I mean, you were going into someone's room and just singing hymns, but
Yeah,
you were holding their hand. So even
right.
act going into someone's room that you know is a Buddhist, or going into someone's room who just kind of is more general spirituality, or
Hmm.
someone who's
Hmm.
Catholic or Christian, but you're
Yeah.
not familiar with that community of faith, just accessing faith first, accessing either the music or accessing a
Hmm.
worship service or Bible readings, and just
Hmm.
holding their
Right.
hand. It's just having that connection,
Right.
and them
Right.
being able to have that spiritual support, like you said, that
Hmm.
inspiration and that hope, but
Yeah.
using their specific community of faith in that
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah. It's just
Yeah.
that's what love is, right? You're extending
Oh,
yourself. You're learning what you need to learn to meet their need. And there's so many ways to do that. And there are tools out there to do that. And
mm,
yeah, that's an act of love. That's the definition of
love
love, right? You put your feet where your heart and your mouth
it. Oh,
are. So
oh, I
yeah.
love this now. I'm seeing this thing of like faith first is an act of love,
Yes,
because all of us have come together to create this tool that it could be
absolutely.
used as their act of love. Oh, well, I'm so grateful for having, and that's the thing, is we could have easily gotten on the phone and shared this conversation, but there is something about being able to share it with others,
Yeah.
to have a deeper understanding of what you bring to faith first, but then also more about you. And I think that's such a beautiful gift that you've given Coro, that we can give
Oh,
and extend out to the rest of the world.
well, thank you,
And
Deb. Yeah.
so,
It's my honor and pleasure to partner with you.
uh, it's I promise you, it's more of our honor.